Good afternoon, honored ministers, ambassadors, professors, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to the Stockholm School of Economics. We from the school side are honored to, together with the Embassy of the Slovak Republic here in Stockholm and the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics, to be hosting this seminar. The Stockholm School of Economics is an increasingly international school. Our students and faculty come from all over the world, and we have a truly global outlook in all our teaching and research. One of our objectives is to be an intellectual hub, at least in this part of the world, for intellectual debate and for development, or perhaps one could even say for knowledge co-creation within business and policy. At the school, our main foci are business, economics and finance, and these are of course embedded in social and political contexts. But we believe that more than ever, the future leaders of our increasingly internationalized world need to be trained, and need to be trained in their social sensitivity and ability to make well-informed judgments. That's why we're so pleased and proud to be co-hosting this event today. And the seminar today will shed light on the Eastern Partnership in the context of the Vilnius Summit. And I will just in a few moments hand over the word to Miroslav Lajčák, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs in the Slovak Republic. And thereafter, Carl Bildt, who's the Minister for Foreign Affairs here in Sweden, will deliver his speech after that. And thereafter, Torbjörn Becker from SITE, the Stockholm Institute for Transition Economics, that's located here at the school. He will moderate the discussion and then open up for questions and answers. So basically, with these few words, I would just like to once again warmly welcome you here to the Stockholm School of Economics, and thereby just leave the word to our distinguished guest, Miroslav.
Thank you very much for your words of welcome. I'm thrilled to be here. I've heard so much about this university, and it's my first visit. And I'm also impressed by the crowd here. I hope you are here on your own initiative. You are not forced to come here to listen to us. So one thing I can promise is that I'm not going to read the speech. I would rather share my views and ideas about the Eastern Partnership, how we see it from Central Europe, from Slovakia, what are our expectations from this program. I will start with the European Union, which is a global player, as you know very well. There is no international issue, there is no international problem where the European Union would not be part of it. Traditionally, Europe has been the one who paid the bills for the others to run the show and to make or to find political solutions, which is not the role we want to play. And as we grow bigger and more compact, and after we've signed the Lisbon Treaty and created European External Action Service, it's clear that Europe wants to be more ambitious and to be more of a player and not only a payer. And it's logical that when we are acting in such parts of the world like Africa, we want to be in the leading role when it comes to our neighborhood. Because if we are to be a global player, then we have to demonstrate it in countries which are neighboring to the European Union. We have our program for the countries of the Western Balkans, which is enlargement policy. That means ultimately all these countries will join the European Union. 9 years ago, European Union came on with the European neighborhood policy, which was focusing on the south, so Northern Africa and countries to the south of Europe. And then 4 years ago, upon the initiative of my distinguished colleague Carl Bildt and our Polish colleague Radek Sikorski, Sweden, Poland initiated the idea of the eastern dimension of European neighborhood policy, namely the Eastern Partnership. The Eastern Partnership policy is aimed at the 6 countries of the former Soviet Union, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and the 3 Caucasus republics, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And the idea is very positive and innocent. Namely, this is our common neighborhood between the European Union and the Russian Federation. And we believe it's in everyone's interest that these countries are politically stable, predictable, economically prosperous, and respecting more or less the similar set of values as we do when it comes to the rule of law, basic principle of democracy, and protection of human rights. So it's not meant to offend anyone. It's definitely should be in the interests of everyone. So it's not a zero-sum approach, but it's rather a win-win approach. The idea became imminent after the events in Georgia, after the war in Georgia, 2008, and in 2009 we had the first official launching of the program in Prague. The Prague summit started based on partnership policy in the European Union. Prague was a success in itself because the fact that the summit did take place and all the leaders were there, and we ended up with having a tangible program. Then we spent our time elaborating what are the details of Eastern Partnership, and it all boiled down to three basic policies, which are called political association, economic integration, and visa liberalization. Political association means these countries will adhere to the same sets of values. We will sign association agreements with them. That means we will be following the same goals and organizing our political lives according to the same set of values. However, we stop short of offering full membership in the European Union to these countries. But the formula is fair, would I say, because it's open-ended. So we say, we are not saying, like in the countries of the Western Balkans, that we are offering you a membership, but we are not saying that there will be no membership either. So the end game depends on what you make out of it. And how committed you will be to this program, it will decide about what the end game of this program is. Economic integration means expanding the European free trade area and European common market to these countries. That means full integration into the European common market for these countries, and for this purpose we are preparing a deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement. And visa liberalization is something I don't need to elaborate on because of course it's very attractive for all these countries and their citizens to get ultimately visa-free travel to the European Union. We've also agreed that the Eastern Partnership Program will have two dimensions: bilateral, where we engage individually with these countries, and multilateral, when they work together among themselves as six. Then we had the second summit 2011 in Warsaw, which was a success in the way that it became clear that it's already a serious program that acquired additional dimensions, such as NGO dimension, civic dimension, parliamentary dimension, business dimension. So it really works in number of dimensions and number of directions. The problem with Warsaw was that Belarus was missing for different reasons. And now, in November this year, we will have a third Eastern Partnership Summit, which is taking place in Vilnius, because Lithuania, as you know, is presiding over the European Union this 6 months. We have progressed a lot in our preparation. So what is our ambition? What are our expectations from Vilnius Summit? First of all, we would like to sign the association agreement and DCFTA with Ukraine. Ukraine has been most advanced. We've initiated this agreement with them. Actually, it happened to be me when I worked in Brussels, and my very last working day before taking over as the foreign minister of Slovakia on the 31st of March 2011, I initiated association agreement with Ukraine. There has been, so it's the first out of the 6 countries that progressed that far. So we speak about signing, but of course there are some conditions. And there are 3 countries with whom we have already completed negotiations on the association agreement, DCFTA, namely Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. So the goal has been to initiate these 3 agreements with these countries. The second goal is, of course, to progress on the free movement of people, on visa liberalization. The third goal, to develop economic cooperation with these countries in general and among themselves. And the fourth goal is to adopt a summit declaration that would be forward-looking, strategic, and that would give us perspective for the period to come, beyond Vilnius. Because if we are successful and if we achieve what we want to achieve, then what will follow is implementation, which is extremely important, but not extremely visible and definitely not very sexy. So we need to keep the program visible and on the agenda and make it attractive for our partners and for our public. So that's why it's really important that apart from painful implementation and technical nitty-gritties, there is something that keeps it on the radar screen for all of us. So, are we facing challenges in this program? Yes, we do. It would be too easy and too boring if we were not. What are the challenges? First one is that the Eastern Partnership is not the only game in town. As you know, there is a country called the Russian Federation, and it has its own regional project, which is called the Eurasian Union. And Russia happens to be interested in the same countries as we are working within the Eastern Partnership program. Now, this meeting that we are having right now would be different if we had met a week ago, because something very important happened last week, namely that Armenia, after concluding association agreement and DCFTA negotiations with us, announced that they are joining the customs union with the Russian Federation. And it's clear that you can't have both, because it's mutually exclusive. It's based on different sets of rules. So that means if Armenia goes along and decides to join the customs union, we will not sign the association agreement DCFTA. That means they will not be part of our economic and cultural space. They will be part of a different space. Russia is discouraging the other countries of the Eastern Partnership from signing or from entering into even initialing of our agreements. So, as I said at the beginning, the Eastern Partnership was never meant to be a policy or instrument against anyone, particularly not against Russia. It so happens that there is a competition between the European Union and Russia on or about the Eastern partners. So that's one challenge, how to keep it as a win-win policy and not to turn it into a zero-sum game, or not to go back into a Cold War mentality. The second challenge is increasing differentiation among the Eastern partners themselves. It becomes clear that we need to be less rigid and more flexible in implementing our policy without giving away or without stepping back from what is fundamental for us, that means our values. But these countries are different. You have two front runners, which are Moldova and Georgia. You have Armenia that has been progressing quietly but has put basically itself out of the competition now. You have Ukraine, which is huge, which is important, which has progressed furthest away, as I said, but Ukraine has to address three conditions as stipulated by the European Union, and the most sensitive and most visible of them is so-called selective justice. And you know that for many EU member states, selective justice means particularly the case of Yulia Tymoshenko. And it's difficult to imagine that there will be consensus among the EU 28, and particularly that there will be majority among the members of European Parliament to sign and ratify the association agreement with Ukraine as long as Yulia Tymoshenko is in prison. I'm saying this as an observer because I can also say that Slovakia would be ready and is ready to sign, because we believe it's important, but I see no consensus on this issue. Then there is Azerbaijan, which is in a different position because, first of all, they are not members of WTO, therefore they cannot sign the DCFTA. And this is the richest out of the 6 countries, so not really depending on our financial incentives, and they would prefer a slightly different treatment from us. And then there is Belarus, with all the limits on the shortcomings on democracy and limits on our dialogue, which is non-existent right now. We are discussing if and how to invite Belarus to the summit and how to engage with them. So that means, as I said, the first challenge is 2 concepts. The second challenge is the increasing differentiations. And the third challenge is the fact that 4 out of these 6 countries are confronted with what we call frozen conflicts, but these conflicts are not frozen. You have Transnistria as a problem for Moldova, you have Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a problem for Armenia and Azerbaijan, and you have South Ossetia and Abkhazia as a problem for Georgia. And we cannot pretend these problems don't exist, we cannot engage with these countries with ignoring the existence of these problems, because these are huge security problems. At the same time, we shall respect the fact that for each of the problems, there is already international arrangement. There is a Minsk group dealing with Nagorno-Karabakh, and there is a so-called 5+2 dealing with Transnistria, and there is a Geneva mechanism dealing with the Georgian regulatory territories. So how to be more involved without disrupting the architecture which is already there. So these are the issues that we are also discussing right now, but as I said, we should be ambitious, and the European Union should have its say also in dealing with these conflicts. So this is, I say, state of play of the Eastern Partnership. It's easier for me to start because I could present the facts, and Kyle will have to add the philosophy, which is more difficult. My final remark is about the role of my country here. We believe that countries like Slovakia, of course, we are key supporters of this program, because we have been through transition ourselves successfully. We have a lot of experience, which is authentic, mostly positive. We can share a lot with these countries. We know how beneficial it was for us to undertake all the reforms, how much it paid off to our citizens, how good it was, and we can talk very openly with our partners because they know that we are talking to them on the basis of our own experience, and we are not telling them something we've learned from the books. That's why all the countries from Central and Eastern Europe and Northeastern Europe are strong supporters of this program. And of course, probably the very last challenge, which is not a huge one, but it speaks for itself, is that if we had first summit in Prague, the second in Warsaw, the third one is taking place in Vilnius, and the fourth one is scheduled to take place in Riga, it also indicates a bit about the European Union's attitude when it comes to this Eastern Partnership, and it's really important that it's a policy which is equally enthusiastically supported by all the EU member states. And I'm not saying we are divided, but it would be good to show and to demonstrate that this policy is supported by so-called old and new members. So I think I'll stop here, so I'll leave some space for my colleague and friend Karol. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Miroslav, and my task is then to follow up on what you've said. But let me start by saying it's very nice to see you here in Stockholm. This is actually the first time Miroslav Lajcak has been here officially as Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Slovakia, but it's certainly not the first time he's been here, because we have been working closely together in different capacities over the years, dealing, has to be said, primarily with another of the partnerships that the European Union develops, and that is Southeastern Europe and primarily the Balkans. But the topic today is the Eastern Partnership. We spent some time together also in Vilnius on Friday, together with the other European Union foreign ministers, updating ourselves on progress in this particular respect. And I think it's important to highlight the importance of the Eastern Partnership, because what we do is, of course, inside the European Union and in different public discourses, we are preoccupied by quite a number of different things. We are dealing with, let's say, our Western partnership, that is our partnership with the United States quite a lot, obviously. In Sweden, we have been spending quite some time with, I wouldn't call it partnership, but the northern dimension in terms of the Arctic issues. And of course, when we meet the EU foreign ministers, we are dealing endlessly with all of the challenges down in the south of the Mediterranean, beyond Turkey, in an area that is going to preoccupy us increasingly, I think, in the years ahead. But the East is profoundly important. And in 2008, as Miroslav said, we launched the Eastern Partnership. It wasn't that the European Union didn't have any policy whatsoever before that, but we felt it was the need to conceptualize it, put it in one framework, and start to accelerate. It has to be said that we were to a certain extent helped in getting this initiative anchored and accepted by each and everyone by the Georgia War in August of that particular year. That made it crystal clear, even to those governments and states in the European Union who might have doubted up until then, that these had to be priority issues for the stability and further development of Europe as a whole. And now we are then in the run-up to the summit meeting in Vilnius in November. That will be the most important meeting since we set up the Eastern Partnership. In essence, of course, this is about our effort to try to, by the magnetism of European integration, enlarge the area of the rule of the law, of open economies, and of representative, decent government throughout the European continent. That can be done through membership in the European Union, and the enlargement process is also an exceedingly important one. We're dealing with that one to a very large extent when it comes to the Balkans and Turkey. But even beyond that, the extension of our cooperation, extension of our instruments of integration do transform economies and do transform societies, not necessarily day by day or week by week or month by month, and not necessarily even year by year, but decade by decade. Most certainly it does. And that is the essence of this particular policy, primarily to these particular 6 countries, but of course in the longer perspective we wouldn't exclude Russia from these particular attempts at integration and cooperation, although it is too large and too different to be part of the Eastern Partnership. Why is the Vilnius meeting going to be so important? Well, it's important because now we are really coming to fruition with the operational thing that we have set up. And that is this that is called DCFTA. It's not a phrase that you hear mentioned very often if you go out and talk to people at Valhallavägen. Might be the odd person passing by. But it's one of these Brussels phrases. And it means deep and comprehensive free trade area. What is that? Well, we do free trade agreements nowadays with a lot of different places around the world. And we are now in a phase where we do somewhat more of them than we've been doing for quite some time. That's an important thing, needless to say. But the deep and comprehensive free trade area is far more, because it envisaged a fair amount of regulatory cooperation and a fair amount of integration in quite a number of other structures of integration of the European economies. It also has another component in the association agreements, and that is the European Energy Community, which really extends the application of the European Union acquis in the energy area, which might not be massive, but is quite significant to these particular countries. So apart from the free trade part, which is important, needless to say, you have the regulatory convergence that is even more important, and the deep and comprehensive free trade area. These are the most ambitious agreements that the European Union has ever signed with anyone. I mean, the only comparison that I can think of is the customs union arrangement that we signed with Turkey in 1995. A customs union is, of course, somewhat more ambitious in terms of the customs integration and harmonization. But it has nothing, that particular thing, or very little, of the regulatory convergence that we find in the DCFTA. So I would argue the DCFTA goes in its transformative effects long term further than a customs union. And if you look at what the customs union, in coordination with a couple of other things, enlargement process, has done in the transformation of Turkey during 15 years, it is a mind-boggling change that we've seen in the Turkish economy and in Turkish society, without necessarily predicting that we will see in every single respect the same development. We have negotiated this association agreement and the CFTA with these countries for quite some time. As said, Miroslav initialed the agreement with Ukraine. but then we run into political difficulties with Ukraine. Because for these agreements to work, they need an adherence to elements, fundamentals of the rule of the law. That applies in the business sector, obviously, but it also applies in the realm of human rights and how the politics of these different countries are organized. And thus we can't be ignorant to some of the things that we've been seeing happening in Ukraine. And thus, as Miroslav said, we expect them to move forward in improvement of their electoral process, in terms of reforming their legal justice, judicial system, and deal with some of the more outrageous cases of selective justice that we've seen. And that is why, after the initialing, nothing has been happening with the Ukraine agreement, but we do hope to be able to register progress on these three issues so that we can then, at Vilnius or prior to Vilnius, sign the agreement with Ukraine and then actually also start implementing it. After signature comes ratification, and ratification tends to be a fairly drawn-out procedure in the, however mind, that's going to be 30 parliaments. Because, I mean, take the Ukraine agreement, needs to be ratified by Ukraine, 28 member states, and the European Parliament. That makes 30 parliaments. And you know how messy one parliament can be. 30 parliaments is going to be a fairly time-consuming thing. Accordingly, we aim to take a decision to start to implement the provisions, or most of the provisions of the agreement, more or less right away, so that transformative element of the agreement start to set in. Then with the other countries, we have been, for a number of reasons, been somewhat slower, but agreements are now on the table with Moldova, with Georgia, and with Armenia. This is what they have wished. It answers the expectations coming from their countries, and of course we respect the wishes that they have. What we've seen, of course, during the last few weeks has been massive and mounting pressure from the country that Miroslav mentioned, Russia, in order to say to these countries, you shouldn't sign. You should, or you shouldn't complete this particular process with the European Union. You should go instead into the customs union with Russia, Kazakhstan and Belarus. That is the beginning of the Eurasia Union, which is, I think, the most ambitious, if not the, foreign policy project of the presidency of the Putin period in Russia. We've seen them blocking trade, we have seen them threatening gas deliveries, we have seen them threatening delaying exports, and of course this led to Armenia last week changing course and saying they will go for the customs union. Armenia is an extremely vulnerable country, an extremely vulnerable economy, and of course they have been subject to extreme pressure before making this U-turn. That's their choice, and we will register it as such, and hope that the Armenian leadership has made a choice that in the long run turns out to be okay, although you can have different views on that. But from our point of view, of course, the association agreement and the DCFTA with Armenia will not happen. That doesn't mean that they are not part of the Eastern Partnership, because there are others where we don't have, because they don't wish it, that sort of ambitious relationship. Belarus is one obvious example. They're still part of the long-term Eastern Partnership, because history, as you know, is an open-ended process. I do think that the long-term or medium-term even economic potential that is in these agreements is quite massive. I was given some figures which I think are quite interesting. If you look at Sweden only, Swedish investments in each of the countries of Estonia, of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, in each of them is bigger than all of our investment in the Eastern Partnership countries as of today. But what we saw after that enlargement that happened in 2004 with all of these countries was a massive and quick increase in trade, and investment. Once you see the rules clarified and you see the potential, then economic actors will act as they do. And you can, as a matter of fact, take Slovakia as a good example, going somewhat further back. Slovakia wasn't necessarily that, well, it had an industry, needless to say, during the Soviet period, but essentially uncompetitive, gone broke, useless, to phrase it in those terms. Then Slovakia made itself an attractive investment destination and an attractive production location and attractive massive investments. And if I'm not wrong, I think you are by now the biggest producer of cars per capita in the world. It's not Japan, it's not the United States, it's not Germany, it is Slovakia. And a lot of the cars that you think are made in Germany, haha, not the case. They're coming from Slovakia. There are quite a number from Asian countries as well. They are produced in Slovakia. Now, go 10, 15, 20 years into the future, and I would expect that Slovakia will still be a major producer. But in much the same way as you have German and other industry moving quite a number of their production to Slovakia, you would have this move further to the east if the potential is there. And to take Ukraine as an example, I think Ukraine, if they handle their politics right in the years to come, has the potential to be our neighbor China in terms of production location in Europe. Excellent conditions for production of different sorts, provided that there is the rule of the law, provided there is the predictability, provided that there is the access to the European markets. And we should not forget that the European Union is, for all of its difficulties nowadays, the largest integrated economic market in the world. And the DCFTA gives these countries predictability in terms of some of the rules of the games of the economy and access to the single biggest market in the world. If they don't manage to do something out of that, I don't know. Then, of course, short-term change, transformation, structural change in their economies are needed. So these are the challenges that we are facing. You could add to that, which Miroslav alluded to and should not be forgotten, that we also have purely political changes. Some of the unsolved issues of the breakup of the Soviet Union are still there. Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh, most obvious of them, but then of course the effect of the Georgia War with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These are not frozen conflicts, that's the wrong term, I agree with that. These are conflicts that are moving. Nagorno-Karabakh is a conflict where you have people killed virtually every week. Doesn't hit the headlines anywhere, but can easily escalate and spiral out of control. South Ossetia, Abkhazia, unsustainable over time, and Transnistria, of course, very small place and very difficult to see how that can be sustained. But all of these issues that, if they are mishandled, or if they are used by the one power or the other, whoever that can be, to create instability, can create massive instability if we are not there all the time, with active diplomacy primarily from the European side, but also with the help of other actors, notably the United States, in order to contain and, if possible over time, manage to solve these particular conflicts. So just to round up, the European Union is essentially about peace and prosperity in our part of the world. We do that on a daily basis by what we do within our countries. We have the enlargement process, but the Eastern Partnership is an extremely ambitious attempt to continue this process in a part of Europe which has extremely low standards of living, has not done a lot of the transformation that is necessary, where there are remaining serious political conflicts. But it's an offer to help them, it's an ambitious one, and of course stability and progress in this part of Europe is fundamentally very much in our own long-term, both economic and political interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I can ask you to stay up here and Mr. Lajczak, please. Yes, please. I'll sneak around back here. Thank you for two inspiring and interesting keynote addresses. I want to follow up with a couple of questions on this topic, of course. First of all, we all know that you have been in Vilnius together with the other ministers for foreign affairs from the EU. Before that meeting, the agenda was said to be about exactly the Eastern Partnership. But I think when I and many others look in the news today, we basically only read about discussions about Syria. So could you give us an insight into what was actually discussed in Vilnius? Were there other things than Syria that you actually dealt with over those couple of days?
Yes, we did discuss Eastern Partnership. We've also discussed European security and defense policy, and then we discussed the Southern Partnership and Syria in the first place. I'm not surprised that Syria was the news that, or the issue that hit the news, but we had a very good, I would say very serious, deep discussion about Eastern Partnership, particularly in the wake of the statement coming from Armenia that they are going to join the customs union. So what was important for us was to hear from the European Commission that these two projects are incompatible. It means if you go for one, you opt to get out of the other. And second important point that was also made quite clear, that association agreement and DCFTA are inseparable. So you cannot have one without the other.
Would you like to fill in?
No, but it's as usual. I mean, the media, nothing wrong with the media is the media, they are supposedly right on everything. But there's only one issue at each time. And of course, Syria is a huge issue. But there are other huge issues that we also discussed that don't get any attention. The situation in Egypt is not getting better, it's getting worse. A very complicated situation in Libya. Iraq looks distinctly fragile at the moment. We have the entire issues of the transition in Afghanistan, those were not on our agenda now. We have been dealing with, we have been sort of fairly successful, I think, by the standards of the place with our operations in Mali. We have been fairly successful by the standards of the place with our operations in Somalia. These are issues that don't get to the headlines, but which we devote quite a lot of attention to, and sometimes we register significant problems and significant sort of crisis, and sometimes when you don't see anything in the media whatsoever, you can see that things are moving forward. Then, as Miroslav had said, we used quite some time on sort of security policy and defense policy, and significant discussion on the Eastern Partnership.
Don't forget the Middle East. We spent some 4 hours together with Secretary Kerry, and we devoted half of this time discussing the Middle East, the negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, and the rest, of course, discussing Syria.
Another issue that you have raised, both of you here today, is Armenia joining the customs union with Russia, or saying that it will. And also this idea of creating win-win with Russia. But on a practical level, can this actually be achieved? I mean, is it actually that the EU has to somehow be more flexible and say you can actually be part of the Russian deal, but still if you fulfill all the conditions, you could still have a DCFTA with Europe? Or can we actually see what is a practical solution to this, not having to make a choice between Russia and the EU, which I think is quite complicated for these
Well, I mean, it's not a question of making a choice fundamentally. I mean, if assuming that sort of Ukraine wants a DCFTA, I think Russia is going to be an extremely significant both economic and industrial partner for I mean, it's an important country for us as well. So it's not a question of sort of rupturing cooperation and integration with Russia in any sort of way. And that's the important point. It's not a zero-sum game from our point of view. I mean, it sounds like others see it more as a zero-sum game. But of course, if you are in a customs union, by definition, if you are in a customs union, you hand over sovereignty of your trade policy to someone else. That's what we have done. I mean, Slovakia really doesn't have a trade policy. That's run by the European Commission in Brussels. Then, of course, we sit in the Council of Ministers and decide the fundamental, but the execution of the policy. The customs union, this one, the other one over to the east, is of course slightly different. To phrase it slightly diplomatic terms, you can say that the decision-making procedures are simplified in that particular customs in relationships to what we find in the European Union. I mean, it's a completely Russian thing. And if you hand over your trade policy to someone else, then you can't be in a free trade arrangement.
And it's not, you know, some sort of political retaliation. Like if you sign with them, you don't sign with us. It's simply the fact that there are two concepts which do not fit together because they are based on different input, on different standards. So if you either harmonize your trade policy with the customs union or with the European Union. So, and it's your choice, it's your free choice. We can suggest what we believe is better for you, but we can only respect what your answer, what your choice is. But it's not possible to be part of both. So it does not mean that we will no longer engage with Armenia. It does not mean we are becoming hostile towards Armenia. No, we will continue our dialogue, but we know that association agreement, DCFTA, is no longer the end stage of our dialogue. It's out of options now.
But do you think that perhaps these countries would have a different view of the sort of costs and benefits of the relative alternatives if there had been a clear vision of actually joining the European Union at some end date? Is this complicating the discussions now?
This is an argument, but it's not the most decisive one. The most decisive one are the security arrangements, the security issues, and also, well, the energy dependence. In both cases, these countries need Russia. Russia is a very strong player, and you know, you have a European offer, strategic vision on one hand, and you have imminent economic and security needs on the other hand. So, these are the options you weigh.
Russia operates somewhat differently. I mean, take just what's in the public domain, what they have said to Deputy Prime Minister Rogozin, said to Moldova. He said that if you move on with this European integration thing, we can cut your gas supplies. And
he said, I hope you won't freeze during the winter.
Okay. Quite. And these the economies of the ex-Soviet area are all linked up to these gas networks and have, as I said, extremely energy inefficient economies, very much dependent upon these gas supplies. And if you have sort of a dramatic increase of prices, or if you have a cut of supplies, you risk more or less collapsing their economies. I mean, this is brutal. Then suddenly, and Russia is of course a country that is extremely careful about health standards of different sorts. So the Russian health inspectors have now again found that Moldovan wines might be seriously threatening to your health. And this happens now and then. And it sort of tends to go with the political trend. So they've said that it is likely that there will be no Moldovan wine export to Russia, solely, of course, out of concern for the Russian consumers.
So it's a bit like Systembolaget in Sweden then?
Yeah.
So if
another ex-Soviet institution.
But to get back on the more serious track here, we had the EU actually receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. I think the three of us up here actually thought that made sense, and your country is a great example on how the EU actually helped you transform your country in many positive ways. But I do think there has been sort of a loss of appeal of the European Union, not only through the crisis, but also some of the political movements we have seen throughout Europe. Do you see this as sort of a cycle going up and down, or is there a path that we can establish so the EU gets back this sort of role as a strong external anchor for a reform process in the Eastern Partnership countries?
For me, European Union is a tanker, very stable. It takes time to set the course, but then EU keeps the course. So we are serious about enlargement as we have ever been, but on the other hand, we are definitely less enthusiastic. Why? Because Europe got somehow spoiled by the attitude of Central and Eastern European countries like mine. We were eager to join, and we would do everything, and we did everything it took to get to the European Union. We knew why we were doing it, and it paid off, and we see the benefits. Europe somehow expected the same from the countries of the Western Balkans, but did not get the same because these countries had to deal with other challenges, name, border, definition of who they really are. And these are vital issues, and therefore, even if they said that EU integration is their first priority, in real life it wasn't always the case. So therefore the process went more slowly, and it contributed to the loss of enthusiasm on the side of the European Union. And the second reason is the crisis. Of course, the EU had to deal with our own internal affairs, and therefore, well, it's all about money, and enlargement, it costs money. So it was not the EU now pushing the process ahead, it's rather the countries of the Western Balkans who need to convince EU that the enlargement is good for us, not only for them. But I said, we haven't changed the course, but of course there is less enthusiastic rhetoric and logically more effort on addressing issues inside of the European Union rather than outside of the European Union.
I think it's still surprising how sort of attractive the European Union is. I mean, if you go to all the countries in the periphery, they want to go in this direction. I mean, Armenia, for obvious reasons, have been pressured into another situation now. But take the Balkans, as Miroslav said, they had other priorities. Yes, absolutely. I mean, after war is always somewhat difficult, and it was 10 years of war of a devastating character. But what one other small piece of news, which never made it to any of the newspapers in this country, I guess, was that there was an agreement in Brussels yesterday between Serbia and Kosovo on energy and telecommunications. I mean, it sounds somewhat detailed, but we know that it's not only that there is one little devil in the details. Every single detail of these agreements is composed of many devils, and it would never have been possible for them to sit down together and start to sort out these issues if it hadn't been in the European headquarters in Brussels, with Cathy Ashton sort of manoeuvring them sometimes, or giving them a room and saying boys behave, or whatever she does. But it does achieve wonders. And we have actually, by that, we sorted out, I don't know, have anyone heard of Piran Bay? Be happy. But some of us, others have Europe spent a lot of time for preventing what was a serious conflict in Croatia and Slovenia from blowing up. Gone. So time after time we see the attractiveness of the European Union making it possible for them to overcome problems that otherwise might well have exploded. Haven't done everything. Transnistria, Georgia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, that's somewhat further away. And there are other powerful actors who are playing their own games. But the attractiveness is still, the soft power of the European Union is there, and it works.
So I would like to invite a few questions from the floor. We have a couple of minutes. I see in the back and here. So do we have microphones, or if you could just introduce yourself? Yeah, in the back.
Fabia Mittman from World Forum. I would like to ask, following up Honourable Minister Bildt on his view, on the positive view of the soft power that is the EU today. We know that the public opinion in the European Union is not as positive today for the European Union due to all the economic troubles. Does it make it less attractive and maybe more vulnerable to challenges put forward by Russia, for instance, towards the Eastern Partnership. And to you, Honorable Minister Lashak, I would like to know about your defense alliance within other Central European countries. Is it a model for the future, since on the EU agenda this year, defense will be on topic? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
Well, for us, the fundamental solution to our defense issue and to our protection is our membership in NATO, of course. NATO is also dealing or struggling with financial problems. The contributions from member states are smaller than the commitments have been. So therefore, we invented smart defense and pooling and sharing. That means to do more with less money. So what we are trying to do in our part of Europe, namely Central Europe, Visegrad 4, is to develop joint capabilities, like common protection of airspace, for example, joint battle groups, so that we can be more efficient, or we can specialize on certain functions and our neighbors will do something else, and we will provide the services to each other. And that's, we believe, is an efficient way, first of all, how to address the issue of financial shortcomings, as I said. Second, how to show the high level of trust that exists among the countries of Central Europe.
And on the first question, the attractiveness, no, I don't think it affects us that much. It's, as Miroslav said, I mean, the EU is a fairly robust tanker, and is seen as a fairly robust tanker by people in the periphery. I mean, that was go back 2 years in the financial crisis. I mean, there was not a single fund manager in New York who wasn't predicted the breakup of everything related to Europe within 2 weeks. But first, they were all wrong. Secondly, people in the European periphery never believed that. They knew things. And even if you say, well, supported opinion polls have gone down, yeah, certainly the case. I look at the Swedish one, gone down slightly, but still at a fairly high level. But to go back 15 years in time, whatever it is, 20 years in time, soon when we had a referendum on being a member or not, and I can't remember the figures, but I guess it was 52-48 or something like that. It was fairly thin. So you had nearly half of the population who didn't want to be members. And some of them even wanted to sort of leave afterwards. If you now ask the Swedish people, is there anyone who wants to leave the European Union, you would have to run around quite a lot to find anyone. Even political parties that still formally have that demand on their party platform. It's rather like the Social Democrats being in favour of a republic. It's not something that they prefer to mention in public any longer. So essentially, I think it's rather comfortable.
I know that there would be many questions left in the audience, but I also see that the time is running out. So, but before we leave those two gentlemen, I want to tell you that we will have some light refreshments and a chance to continue discussions out in the atrium, which is here outside of the aula. But before we leave this room, I would like to introduce Jakob Rudberg. He's the president of the Student Association here at the school, and he will just present our two distinguished speakers with some gifts from the Student Association. So Jakob, please.
So Mr. Miroslav Lachak and Mr. Carl Bildt, on behalf of the student body and the Student Association, as well as the Stockholm School of Economics, I would like to thank you both for visiting us here and extend this token of appreciation to both of you. This is Handelspunsch, and in Sweden the students at the university level have a tradition of drinking a lot of punch. So you will be able to take one of these home with you. Yeah. The same Slovakia?
Not necessarily punch, but later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Tack så mycket också till vår moderator Torbjörn Bäcken.
So then we just invite you out to the atrium for some refreshments. Thank you very much.